One of the things that Derek and David, you had the privilege of leading off for us. And before we go to our colleagues' questions in a moment, are there any perspectives or observations you've had of our conversation of the last hour that you wish to share? If not, we can just go to questions.
Let's just do questions.
Yeah,
very good.
Questions.
Very good. Realizing that we're between our session and lunch, what I like to do is truly encourage, first of all, any questions that you have immediately, but also realize in my own career, most of the best conversations occur at lunch and in the hallway. So if you're formulating a question now and you don't have it immediately, what I would fully encourage you all is to take the opportunity to share lunch with any of us and to express your questions then as well. None? Very good. Oh, very good. Dr. Cohen, thank you.
I'm sorry. I know when Ed was talking about the idea of grants given to places like Los Alamos and places like that to do research into e-discovery and figuring out how to index emails and things like that. It sounded like that was geared at being able to access federal records using that technology. I'm curious how the public can get access to that same technology to use on their records, and whether that becomes a proprietary system or whether it's something that will become more readily available to people who just want to do their own work.
Do you want to answer that as research director?
Absolutely. One of the things that I would say, Dr. Cohen, is on behalf of the archives, and realizing that we are the newest and the smallest agency in the coordinated research program of the government. What we do exclusively is research that basically explicitly targets an open source product. So in that respect, one of the things that we purposefully explore is that the products of our research and development and the understanding that basically in some respects I think is the richest outcome is basically fully available without respect to domain. So in that respect, that's very consistent with what we do. The other thing that we purposefully explore here at the National Archives is purposefully as close as can be practically executed is activities that constitute an open innovation model. One of the things that we do in terms of our Center for Advanced Systems and Technology is we release our research developments and our results progressively through Facebook as they occur. One of the other things that we have in terms of results is our work, as Dr. Marciano described, is at the Renaissance Computing Institute, is a novel approach of actively using social media computing and outlets to basically make people aware of our progress and our results as we go along. So in that respect, while we are new, and in some respects we are admittedly small, but in a small way of keeping people informed, and in some senses what I insist on is making research itself transparent, is not following the traditional model of waiting until the product is completed and then beginning to talk about it. So in the respect of basically what I feel is a two-pronged approach of keeping people informed as we go along, for good and bad. It is research, but it's also the aspect we're exclusively using developments in open source computing is potentially a channel to progress along those kinds of lines. Oh, ma'am?
I don't know if this is, okay. I'm a federal employee with the Department of Justice Executive Office for Immigration Review. And the one question I have with all of this panel especially is, how do we address the privacy issues? Because again, one of the fundamental issues I think that we deal with in the government sector is we have privacy concerns as well that we have an obligation to meet, and I'm not sure how we address that in this ever-changing push towards providing data, and especially in open source.
Well, I can tell you that when I was CIO at the National Science Foundation, we had 2 overriding goals: be totally open and transparent, and be totally private and secure. Are these 2 goals in somewhat of a tension? Well, yes, you might assume that. Obviously, the first goal that we do is to try to identify certain information as private and get it out of the public stuff. PII, personally identifiable information. I can't tell you how much we spent at NSF getting rid of PII from all our records, which we wanted to make public. And it's hard to get the investigators to stop telling us what their social security numbers are and what their home addresses are, and so on and so forth. So let me just say this seems to me to be a work in progress, but let me also say, rather tongue-in-cheek, you don't think we have any privacy, do you? The credit unions have known more about us than we know about ourselves for 30 years. And I think they continue to.
On terms of the National Archives, one of the things that we take very seriously is the aspect that deals with the understanding, and in terms of the context of this panel, is the understanding that goes with the tools and the technology that will explicitly respond to those kind of requirements. Because we see that they are not separable from the others. So one of the things that, Dr. Thibodeau described is long-standing work that we've supported jointly with the United States Army in looking at tools that can robustly parse and process digital record collections that have multiple sensitivities. One of the activities in a similar fashion that we supported for several years was joint work with the National Science Foundation that really looked at what is called infrastructure or technology and tools that responds very robustly to data collections or information collections that are defined by complex policies. Today, the outcome of that research is a tool called IRODS. It's an open source tool. It actually today reflects crowdsource technology development that is global. But if you go on the web and you look at IRODS, what you will see, as George described, is some practical tools today that is capable of processing at a very granular level complex collections governed by complex privacies. It's early work, but in fact it is considered a promising piece of architecture.
If I could follow up a little bit on that, having been the privacy officer for the National Institutes of Health for many years, where privacy is obviously a big concern, in the federal government there are 2 aspects of privacy, where the Privacy Act mainly says for the person who's the record's about, they have an absolute right of access and they can even contest what's in that record. For everybody else, you go to FOIA and you deal with the privacy exemption under FOIA. IRODS is the kind of indirection infrastructure thing that I think you could put in place, because IRODS not only helps you manage the information you have in storage, it helps you associate sets of rules with that information. And there can be different rules for different users. So an attending physician at the NIH Clinical Center, for example, obviously gets access to the complete medical record of the patients that that physician is seeing. But someone coming in from the outside who has a legitimate interest in what's the research that NIH is doing, the rule set would restrict access appropriately. In an idealized situation. Now, in an idealized situation now, but we have the foundation for that. IROD stands for Integrated Rules-Oriented Data System, right? This is a project Richard has worked on. The technological capability has been demonstrated and could be implemented with some further development.
Very good. Alexander, you have your last question?
Yep.
Please.
Alex Howard, O'Reilly Media. First, just quick context on news and data.gov and usaspending.gov. The budget cuts that we saw come out this morning, it looks like they've cut funding from $34 million for financial year down to $8 million. So, and we'll see how that actually goes forward in the final budget. But in terms of supporting the e-government transparency, open government transparency, those platforms are not perceived apparently in-house as being fundamentally useful. So the larger question would be, how do you make a business case for serving those platforms or the open data that's going up onto them? To the question of 82 terabytes of email, there's a real push me, pull you between accountability and the government institutions themselves. We know that in the last White House, a lot of the email that was sent from those BlackBerries did not get entered into any record at all. So how do you think about preserving records in the digital age when some of the institutions themselves may be actively working to keep them outside of electronic scrutiny? And then the question for Derek and for data journalist from the Center for Public Integrity, what would you need from government, since this is the forum to bring these things up, to be able to create the data visualizations and the other kinds of vibrant online venues for citizens to come and learn more from government? In other words, if we want to think about funding new journalistic institutions in the context of a fourth of newspaper jobs getting cut in the last 3 years, how can government be involved in doing that, in creating data of such a quality that that can actually be trusted by those journalists, as opposed to them having to build the kinds of structures that Derek described?
Thank you, Alexander. What I'll do is in reverse order, David and Derek. I realize, Alexander, you've asked great questions, hard questions. I expect they could continue through lunch. One of the things I would suggest, Derek and David, do you have immediate reaction or response?
I mean, I like data.gov. I'm not, I think it serves a purpose, but I think in one sense it was putting the cart in front of the horse, because, access to data is great. But I think, as many other folks on the panel have said, I mean, and particularly George, if the data is not good, or if we don't know if the data is good, which is probably even is a worse situation to be in, then saying, here's a bunch of data, go and do stuff with it, isn't all that helpful. And so it's not that I would love to see data.gov defunded or calling for anything like that, but as to what government could do to make it easier for journalists to make sense of information, well, have better data that is well documented and accurate and available. I mean, simplistic, but data.gov is a solution to a problem, but not the solution that we need right now to other problems that have existed for years. And so in that sense, it's a little ahead of its time, is my view on it.
David?
Sure. I think that data.gov is a good first step because it does do some of the things we've talked about. But as Derek said, it's a bit of the cart before the horse. I think part of it right now is a setting of what is going to be, in the bigger picture, the government's role in this. Because I think that's really where the question comes down fundamentally. What does it do for us getting information out and fulfilling a journalistic mission? Well, in this context of a shrinking news media, well, certainly I don't want the government to be involved in the news media. I don't want government requiring reporters to have to take licensing exams and be registered, and that's not the way the press needs to function. So if there's one thing in this, I think we've started to come towards it here, because I don't even think it's necessarily about going back and saying, other than to learn from the current data practices and previous data practices as to people like this coming back to what we were saying, and that is communicating among each other our different needs, our different purposes, and therefore, in this case, for us as journalists, is the clean, reliable data that Derek is talking about in the formats that open it for innovation, people to do what they will with it.
Thank you, David. George, in respect for your role at OSTP, do you have any observations or responses to the question that Alexander just asked about the data.gov and the legislative developments?
Well, I guess we can't afford anything anymore. And that's just one of the anythings we can't afford. I had heard it was cut to 2 million, so you actually gave me good news by thinking it may only be cut to 8 million. I think we're running a marathon, not a sprint, and we're going to have to suffer the budget ups and the budget downs and keep pushing forward as best we can on these things. So developing the culture is young, just like the technology is young. I would add that I think that data.gov, I don't quite go along with the horse before the cart analogy, because I think it took the transparency of data.gov to focus our attention on the fact that data needs to be scrubbed. Over history, we only scrub financial data because we know that people are watching. Now people are watching all the data, and don't think it can be scrubbed for free, by the way. That's going to be a huge cost to assure the same quality in our other data that we already have in our financial data. Ask your CFOs how much they spend assuring that their financial information is correct. So this is a long journey. We're getting a good start, and one of the reasons we're getting a good start is because of new technology that can help.
Thank you all. Thank you, George. On behalf of the Magic Conference, it's been a privilege to join you for this last hour.